Askeladd is an owl bastard, literally and figuratively. He's cold, callous, and conniving with a dash of charisma to rub salt into the wounds he inflicts, and not a care in the world for the cruelty he lets loose across his countless conquests. And yet I can't help but root for the dude. Though like any good villain I hated him from the beginning, by the end I was desperate to see him win. His appeal is contradictory and almost tragic to watch unfold. And today I want to talk about what I think makes him work so well as a villain in Vinland Saga's Viking drenched world. And as a quick side note, this video will focus specifically on the first season of the anime, so for anyone hoping to hear a bit of manga discussion, I apologize. For anyone unfamiliar, Vinland Saga is an anime series directed by Shuhei Yamada, produced by Wit Studio, and based on the manga of the same name by Makoto Yukimura, that acts as a loose fictionalization of both the Vinland Sagas and Prince Canut's rise to power, set in 11th century Europe, as a small crew of Vikings look to get Prince Canute, son of King Sven, onto the Danish throne, whilst a young boy named Thorfinn gets caught in their crossfire, after his father, Thor the Troll of the legendary Joms Vikings, is murdered by said crew, and devotes his life to killing their leader, the great and terrible Askeladd. I think there's a lot to like about him as a character, the tactics, the leadership, and especially the swagger. But I think he's also undeniably villainous, helping siege cities in spring and personally laying waste to little villages in winter, butchering anyone who stands in his way for the sake of ambition, profit, and sometimes just for the fuck of it. Even his own men can't help but comment on it. But through it all, there's a hint of care that shines through those atrocities. He has a soft spot for slaves, respect for the warrior whose legacy he's paid to bring to an end, and genuine compassion for the place he calls home and whose people he calls family. So much so his plan to use Canute revolves around protecting that country. And when Atle decides to leave and work an honest life, Askeladd does his part to help him reach it, with the promise of gold and the kind of advice only a true Viking could give. Askeladd has his noble qualities, but they only emphasize his brutality through contrast, and bring with them a self-awareness of how he's too far gone to even consider the life he could have lived had things been different. His actions arguably make him the most evil person in the show, but it's not a feat he's achieved by much. There's plenty of characters with villainous streaks that easily reach similar depths of depravity, whether it be Sven trying to get one son killed so his favourite child can take the crown, Halfdan taking any excuse to enforce the iron will of the law and punish those who try to break it, or hell, even Thorkel's endearing antics stand in stark contrast to his slaughter-bound tendencies, especially toward those who've surrendered and are begging for mercy. There are a few who could be considered truly good, or at the very least not too tainted by this setting. And what examples there are either get killed, sold, broken, or hardened into the kinds of people who would do such things to them. As dark as Askeladd's morality may be, it's still some shade of grey in a world stained red, and the few hints of good that shine through only make me more aware of the shadows he casts. And it's his awareness of this reality that I think he tries to pass on to the younger characters, since to me at least he stands in as a dark reflection of the series' father figures, particularly Thor's. It might be hard to see at first since everything about the two was as different as can be, from their clothing choices and builds to even their hairstyles and color schemes. But not only do both find Thorfinn desperate to protect them, but both are framed in similar ways when they eventually meet their maker at the series' end and beginning. A line is drawn between the two as older male role models that Thorfinn, intentionally or not, takes his life lessons from. But it's the differences I think should be focused on. Thor's was a famed warrior known for his strength who, after the birth of his first child, grew tired of the fighting, knowing the pain his death would bring to his family and the toll his killings have already brought to the loved ones of those who've met his blade. So he ran away from the Vikings to start a new life, getting away from the war zones and slave trades that defined his early days. He does his best to teach Thorfinn that violence is not the honorable path so many revere it as, but it's a lesson that doesn't quite seem to land.
傷つけて良いものなどどこにもいない。
おかしいよそんなの。だって父上は明日戦に行くんでしょ。敵を殺しに行くんでしょ。子供じゃない。父上は嘘を言ってる。僕にだってわかる。
Askeladd, however, drags Thorfinn onto the battlefield to learn how to fight. Rather than keep him away, he uses Thorfinn's grief against him, promising him revenge every time he can do something for the old man, and screwing him over when the time does finally come to duel. He treats him like a tool to be used for his own gain, and through it all, Thorfinn is forced to sharpen his skills to make it back, and as such becomes Askeladd's favourite pair of knives. While Thor tries to teach his son how to live, Askeladd, indirect as it may be, instead gives Thorfinn all he needs to survive. In a similar way, so too does Askeladd darkly reflect Ragnar in his treatment of Canute. Whereas Ragnar raises the prince with love and adoration to counter Sven's neglect, to the point of coddling and stifling his ability to act independently, Askeladd pushes Canute beyond what he's capable of, making him threaten entire armies and killing Ragnar behind his back to force him to stand on his own 2 feet.
ラグナルは死んだ。もう呼んでも来ねえ。
Ragnar did his best to consider Canute's feelings and raised him like his own son, knowing it's something he'd never get from his own father, and that even Canute himself seemed all too well aware of but struggled to admit.
我が子を愛おしく思わぬ父親などいない。
Askeladd, however, dismisses them outright, and forces Canute to come to terms with the horrors of the world around them before it can get the better of him. Askeladd becomes a twisted role model to these kids in his own way, using them for his own ends while teaching them not about the ideals they should strive for, but the reality of where and when they live. And through that, fostering relationships built not on love and respect, but salvaged from apathy and hatred. It creates a complicated image of this aging Viking for me, being well aware of his ulterior motives, but unable to deny the fact that he does his best to keep those close to him alive. This is only heightened by what to me seems like his position as a protagonist for most of the series. That may sound confusing since for many protagonist means hero and villain antagonist, but while often the same, they're not actually synonymous. In my understanding of these narrative technicalities, a hero is the character who acts as a story's moral center, the relatable ideal we're meant to look up to and root for, while the villain is the opposite, they who embody every moral failing a story warns us to avoid. However, a protagonist is a character whose actions push a plot forward, while an antagonist is any character that stops the protagonist. In fact, an antagonist doesn't even have to be a character, just anything that stands in the way of the protagonist and their goal, whether it be a criminal mastermind, a scary wall, or the ever-present threat of existential dread. With this in mind, it's easy to see how Askeladd fits the bill for a villainous protagonist. It's his killing of Thors that sets Thorfinn on his vengeance-fueled path, his quest to make Canute king that drives the action after episode 10, his manipulation, mercenaries, and rumor-milling abilities that puts pressure on Sven in the last few episodes, and his sacrifice that lets everything fall in place in the end. It's Askeladd's actions that carry the story through most of the anime so far. This matters because it means that the narrative's flow doesn't just revolve around his evil deeds, but is also centered around his way of seeing things. He was born into a world that didn't care whether he lived or died, and he soon realized that, as the son of a slave, he would have to fight tooth and nail just to survive. A lesson that got drilled into him from a young age, and that served him well as, after meeting his estranged father, he used it to bide his time and scheme and inherit his father's riches after killing him in his sleep with one of his half-brother's blades. He's preoccupied with keeping himself alive, learning the ins and outs of combat and warfare through trial and error to keep ahead of everyone who wants him dead. And so it's no wonder he doesn't give a second thought to snuffing out someone else's life, since he knows no one else would give a second thought to snuffing out his. This perspective on Askeladd's actions extends to his overarching goals, and especially his mentality about Canute, as he reveals his plans are less about setting up someone he can use and more about setting up someone he would want to lead him, as if in a way trying to make Canute into the fabled king his mother believed would return one day.
王子を足がかりに出世するのにもってこいだ。ビョル、お前が今日まで俺についてきたのはなんでだ？そりゃまあ俺がついて行きたかったからだよ。俺もさ、俺も俺の主を選ぶ。俺の主は俺がついて行きたくなるような男であるべきだ。
As cruel as his choices and decisions may be, his position as a protagonist lets the audience understand why he follows through with them. That said, I think he does also still act as a strong antagonist to Thorfinn's peace of mind. To me, the series' central thematic through-line revolves around people trying to find an escape from this world they found themselves stuck in, desperate to chase after and cling to anything that can ease their day-to-day suffering. For some, it's the promise of Valhalla that makes their pain and bloodshed worth it, and for others it's the hopes that they will one day be able to embrace the love of God. There are those who look to the titular Vinland as an escape from it all.
海の向こうにヴィンランドという名の土地がある。そこは暖かく豊かで、奴隷商人も戦の炎も届かない遠い地。そこなら誰も追っては来れない。
Even Askeladd himself once believed in the legends of King Artorius' prophesied return, when his ancestor would come back from Avalon and save the children of the Romans and Celts. But as the years dragged on, age and experience made him cynical about such optimistic hopes.
今この時アルトリウスがお袋を助けに来ないのなら、そんなものは永遠に来ないのだと。わかるか若造ども。誰かがやらねばならん。英雄でも神でもね、誰かがな。
Vinland Saga's setting is but a mortal coil for its inhabitants to live in, and from that pain rise all kinds of tales about the things that could await them in time or in death that would justify everything they have had to wade through. And I think this idea is core to Thorfinn's journey. While at first looking to escape the boredom of his hometown, thanks to Askeladd he succumbs to the horrors of life at only age 6, and is pushed to his limits to survive in a world always out to get him, leaving a scar so deep he can't even tell when it's bleeding.
十分だろ。一緒に帰ろう。
十分。あんたに何がわかる。あの日から今日までの俺の何を知ってるってんだ。ああ、アステラットが野郎が生きて飯を食いくそたれてる間は十分じゃねえ。十分じゃねえ。
He's overwhelmed by rage and misery, and through the tunnel vision that comes with it, thinks only revenge will bring an end to his grief. And the only thing that stands in his way is the very man he's trying to kill. It's the only path Thorfinn can find to his personal paradise, but it's one that's at best misguided and at worst self-destructive. Every chance he gets to kill Askeladd leaves more death in its wake. From the dozens of many slaughters for a single duel to entire villages that get razed to the ground for the sake of another Viking raid. He barely recognizes how Askeladd is using him until it's too late.
たく、言ってるそばからそれかよ。犬めてに餌に釣られて駆け回りやがって。おめえの働きにはマジで頭が下がるよ。茶番みてえな決闘に付き合ってやるだけで、あのトルケルにまでホイホイ挑んでいくんだもんな。便利なガキだよ、お前は。まったく、トールズにも感謝しねえとな。
He unwittingly goes against every lesson his father taught him about how a true warrior doesn't need a sword. Or, in my interpretation, how a true warrior doesn't need to use violence to make the world a better place, with Thorfinn instead simply adding to the bloodshed his father wanted him to stay away from. He does eventually get an opportunity to step away from it all when he's reunited with Leif Erikson, who promises to bring him to Vinland, but ultimately refuses to let his chance to get to Askeladd slip from his grasp, until he finds that Askeladd himself has ruined that dream, leaving all the blood on Thorfinn's hands to amount to nothing. Thorfinn walks a dark road for the sake of revenge throughout the series, and is something that in the end he pays the price for. And the most ironic part is that while Thorfinn may have lost everything, Askeladd gets exactly what he wanted. It may not have turned out like he expected, but his sacrifice sets up Canute as the next king, keeps his people safe, and in a tragic way lets him finally rest in peace. He's a villain who manages to win. He may have ruined Thorfinn's journey, but he accomplished his goals, and leaves behind a bittersweet legacy as a sacrificial savior and, like all those promised paradises people hope for, the thing Thorfinn will never be able to reach. As a villain, Askeladd's appeal for me lies less in who he is as a character and how the nuances of his personality play out in demented ways, but instead stems from the world he was born into. I think he embodies the very essence of Vinland Saga's setting, a world of war defined by cruelty, nihilism, and a desperation to survive, but where the slimmest glimmer of hope that things can change for the better is still able to thrive. And yeah, those are my thoughts. Boy is it nice to tackle a shorter video every once in a while. I hinted at this one ages ago in a top things video, but I'm glad I was finally able to get around to it. If for nothing else, then just as an excuse to rewatch Vinland Saga, which I gotta say, definitely still one of my favorite anime. Just gotta figure out how to get my hands on the manga now. It was also fun because I decided to try and experiment with some stuff. Obviously, if you've been around for a while, you may recognize the whole villain analysis thing from my Bondrude video, which I did originally want to do as a series, but just didn't have a lot of characters I thought were interesting enough to talk about. But since then, I found a couple of really good villains I'd love to cover, so I wanted to see if I could return to that idea and make it a somewhat regular thing. By which I mean maybe 1 or 2 videos a year. But also I tried something new with how I write by trying to inject a bit more of a prosy and almost poetic style into it, or at the very least to have the mentality of writing prose or poetry while writing. I don't know, I've been hitting a bit of a brick wall with it and thought approaching it with a more creative mindset would help me through it, and it really has been a massive help, both in terms of actually getting through the writing and also in just making it feel more me, if that makes any sense. It's also helped with narration a bit, weirdly, since I can kinda have that mentality of, oh, I'm reading a poem/story, instead of, oh, I'm reading a script. I mean, who would have guessed that thinking creatively helps you do creative things? Though I do still feel like I need to work on it and make it a bit more subtle, just so it doesn't sound too pretentious or try-hardy, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Anyway, hope you are staying safe in these difficult times, keeping your distance, washing your hands, wearing a mask, etc. Let me know what you think, if you agree, disagree, who your favorite character from Vinland Saga is, who your favorite villain is, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and want to see more, then check out my last video, where I talk about all the weird details of Oban Star Racer's intergalactic narrative and why, for me, they make it worth coming back to. Or watch me ramble about my top things of spring 2020. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to come fly with me. Hit the bell, stay notified, follow me on Twitter for more updates, ramblings, or poor attempts at humor, and hopefully, I'll see you later.